To all you leadership hackers. Welcome to another edition of Leadership Hacks on the podcast. And I am so pleased to bring you the one and only Ian Horsman, straight out of Doncaster. He's a Doncaster lad. He's a Doncaster fan, and Doncaster have just been promoted. I know they're vying to go up as champions this weekend, so he'll be a very happy man, I'm sure, if they manage to achieve that. Thank you for joining us on the podcast, and it's great to have you.
It's great to be here. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so Ian, obviously the audience won't know this, but I worked with Ian many moons ago when we were both young. We had no wrinkles or anything like that. Yeah, no grey hairs. But I actually bumped into you, and we haven't talked about this. I bumped into you. I don't know whether it was about 4 years ago at the Belfry.
It was I was there on I was there with work, kind of both work and the missus, doing a bit of I guess work and pleasure, if you like.
Okay,
and I kept looking at you, and I'm like, I know him. But do you remember when we bumped into each other in Centre Parks years before?
Yeah.
So randomly, we've had these since not working together. We've randomly. We live hundreds of miles apart.
Exactly.
Yeah, we've had these random bumps into each other, which have.
I think it means it's meant to be.
Absolutely.
It's the world telling us that we're meant to have this conversation. And the reason I wanted to have this conversation with Ian is Ian's gone on to become a very successful CEO and owner of a recruitment business. And on Leadership Hacks here, one of the things that I like to do is speak to senior figures to understand what their leadership styles are like, but also to educate you on how they have achieved what they have achieved and talking about the ups and downs that come with that journey. So, Ian, I guess my first question to you, because you haven't always been a CEO, you haven't always been this figure who sits in front of me right now. If I take us back to, can you take us back to schoolboy Ian? Who was he? What was he like?
Well, I spent half my school years in Australia. My parents emigrated in the 80s to Australia, so I kind of came back just as kind of high school was looming, maybe 12, 13. So I kind of started as this young lad that had an Australian accent, thrown into school with that I didn't where I didn't know anyone. But I was different because obviously I had an Australian accent, so everyone wanted to talk to me.
Yeah.
So
how long were you in Australia for then?
I think my parents emigrated early 80s, so I can't really remember leaving the UK, and we came back 1990, 91, something like that.
Right.
So, like I said, quite daunting going into high school in a new country, growing up in the other side of the world. So I did find school quite difficult. I think partly because I've been in one country that did things one way and then came to another country. But I guess academically, that's not really my strength. I'd just do anything sport related, just anything that the school would let me do. And that was really kind of what my personality was based around at school was sport. I kind of neglected the things that maybe people say I should have done.
I wonder what your school report would have said.
Well, do you know what? I've got one of these. I can't remember what they're called. Where you write in. It was when you were leaving school. It was like
the national something.
Yeah, and you had to write in, and I've got on my final page. When I grow up, I'll be a professional cricket player.
Oh, really?
And I genuinely believe that. I genuinely believe that.
I'm sure at the time that was every Australian boy's dream.
Yeah.
So it's here to be a footballer.
Yeah, so I genuinely thought that's where my direction in life was going, and then, like a lot of young budding talented cricketers, it didn't quite go that way, and I kind of maybe found friends that liked to go out at weekends and things like that, and that then certainly in girls took priority. So
the teenage years kicked in.
Yeah.
And then what did you do after school then? After leaving school, did you go down the college? Or sixth form and then into university? How did that work?
I did an extended year, like a college year at school. It was kind of like a half an A level with the intention of then possibly going to, I don't know, further education. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I actually ended up doing a university course, and I only joined the university course because my friend was doing it at the same time. So
I hear that story so often.
I'll give that a go.
Exactly the same.
I'll give that a go because I've got nothing else to do. So I did that for about 10 months, took out all the student loans,
Yeah.
you know, did the student life, and then 10 months I had to get a job because I just knew that, that kind of education wasn't for me.
Yeah.
And that, at that point, was really my entrance into the world of recruitment. I sold cars for, I think, a matter of months, and just, hated the weekends and having to work Saturday, Sunday. And my whole purpose in life at that moment in time was getting a job that worked Monday to Friday.
Right. Oh, okay.
So yeah, like I said, from bumbling about, really not knowing what I wanted to do, couple of jobs here and there, I fell into recruitment. I guess everybody I think I ever ask how did they get into recruitment says they fell into it, and that was me.
You say you fell into recruitment, but for the audience, what does that mean to you? So how did you fall into recruitment?
So I was doing a part-time job working for Comet, the electrical retailer, and one of the guys that was a full-time person there that I got to know ended up getting a job in recruitment, and we kept in touch. And he basically said, "We're looking for another recruitment consultant in our office. Why don't you come and have an interview?" And that was kind of it. I didn't even know what recruitment was. I didn't even know there was jobs out there to find people jobs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah, and it is the classic falling into it because
yeah,
that's very similar to my story. I
yeah,
I went into a recruitment company to get a job, as whatever it was, office admin, anything, and they
yeah.
ended up hiring me as a recruitment consultant.
It's
And I
crazy,
was
isn't
like,
it?
well, so what?
And that
Yeah,
you hear that story over and over again. I was lucky enough. I went for the interview, got it. It was for big international recruiter,
yeah,
um, based in Sheffield. And I just remember walking in on my first day, and I had my own desk, my own phone, and my own computer, and I
yeah.
thought I'd made it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
as we all do. So in those primary years, so
yeah,
we've just started working as a recruitment consultant. You've got a little bit of experience from the car sales. You said you hated that, but I'm sure you would
yeah.
have learned something from that. What was it like? What were those early formative years like in the working world?
I think it was. I guess like so many people you hear in recruitment, it was a bit sink or swim, thrown into the deep end. There's a telephone. This is how you register a candidate. Yes, I did get some good training, but outside of some classroom training, it was very much there's your desk, there's your phone, off you go. And I guess it was quite daunting, but for some reason I just took to it. And I think recruitment in them days were very different to what it is now. It was all about building relationships, not only with your clients. I mean, I started in industrial recruitment. They were the days where your industrial temps would come in on a Monday and pick a timesheet up, and then they'd be coming into the office to hand it in on a
Yeah,
Friday.
yeah,
And so, you know, the way that the job was, I mean, it's changed somewhat now, but the purpose is building relationships hasn't changed. And that's what I found really easy, just building relationships with my temps, building relationships with my clients. And I guess the sales, if there's one thing that I took away from school that maybe some other people didn't have, I could talk. I could talk to anyone.
yeah. And is that one of those? That's just the way Ian was, or were you taught to talk to anyone?
No, I think that's just the way I was. I
Yeah,
was, I guess I was quite likable, I'd like to think.
yeah,
So, as a young lad walking onto client premises, yeah, I probably didn't pretend to be anything that I wasn't. I always wanted to learn about what the clients did and show interest in them. I was that person which would go that extra mile and be on site when those new temps started and face up to anything that went wrong.
yeah,
Now, from not having a clue what industrial recruitment, not just industrial recruitment, what recruitment was, probably after 6 months, I was doing well.
buying an expert. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And then you realise back in them days that recruitment can be a bit of a revolving door. And I'm
mm,
sat in this office, and I think after 12 months, I was the longest standing member of the team,
yeah,
and I'm being asked to take like a team leader role.
yeah,
I didn't even have time to think about did I want management. It was something that just kind of fell in my lap a little bit by being the most experienced person in that Sheffield office.
yeah. And I wonder then. I've got a question for you then. Because obviously I come from a recruitment background myself too, and you often see in the recruitment world the younger generation being promoted to manager roles or senior roles in some way, shape, or form because they're good at doing what they do. They're good
Yeah.
at doing the day job, but not that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be good at managing people. How did you? What are your thoughts around that?
Absolutely, and I've learned the hard way, and I've made the mistake over and over again. I think more so, as I've been a recruitment business owner, I've made that mistake more. Maybe because I haven't challenged the recruiters that want that next step because they see it or they feel like they're being overlooked. I've pushed people into leading teams because they're the most experienced top biller, whatever it may
Yeah,
be. And I've got people in my business now which have gone full circle. So they've been in management positions, realised that I've got two of my probably top performers that luckily it didn't lead in their case to exit in the business when they realised this management lark isn't for them.
yeah. Because
It
it's not for
wasn't.
everybody, is it? It's just not.
No,
It's just not for everybody.
just sometimes it's easy to create an environment where you neglect showing people a career opportunity that
Mm,
still is one where they can increase base salary, increase earnings, but means still being an independent performer,
yeah,
looking after your own desk.
yeah,
And that's something that, I've really tried, as in the latter years of being a recruitment owner, is really tried to avoid, to just make that mistake of they're a top performer, let's get them to lead a team.
yeah. No, completely understand and agree with you there with all the
Uh,
sentiments you've shared there. Just coming back to your earlier career then, so you've been thrust into this leadership managerial
yeah.
role. How was it? What was that like at the start? And when you reflect on that time and that period now, what are your reflections? What are your thoughts?
I guess, it was really throwing at the deep end. I mean, when I look back, I was effectively a glorified recruiter still that just had a couple of other recruiters that were learning the ropes whilst
Yeah,
I was doing the things that I'd been doing for the last 12 months. But I think for me, I guess the real taste of management for me, that got the opportunity for me to change my job title. Probably wasn't given the training, but I had the job title and I got given a company car. And again, as far as I'm concerned, I'm taking over the world at this point.
absolutely.
Someone's given me a company car. But that then made me a little bit more, I guess, visible to the market of other recruiters that were looking for managers, etc. And I did what a lot of people do. I think after about 2.5 years uh, with my first employer, and that's when prime time came knocking, and I'd had a few people, kind of obviously kind of drag you away from the role you're in.
Yeah,
But I think the prime time role, that was really where it was like, this is mine. It was that feeling of it's your team, it's the direction you want to go in, and you had a lot more rope to hang yourself, I think, at prime
mm,
time. But I enjoyed that. I felt like, even though I certainly got the support at prime time, you were able to make managerial decisions.
yeah. You were given real responsibility.
Yeah, real responsibility. I had a real P&L. I had
Yeah,
the opportunity to hire my own team, and whereas the previous role there was an internal recruitment that everything went through them, and I just got told if someone was joining my team, and you didn't really get a P&L and things like this. So that's really where I grew up
yeah.
um, at prime time, and that's where I met you, and that's where probably had some of my best years, really.
Your best formative years. And from that time, Ian, or from actually your early career, are there any managers that had a positive or negative influence on you that has shaped the way in which you went on to manage later on in your career?
Yeah, I think for me, being a younger person, being led by managerial people that maybe were, a little bit older than me at that time, there was that. I know you call, that 1990s style being managed. I mean, you probably saw some of their prime time
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
absolutely.
And I had some leaders that I'd run through a wall for, but then they let themselves down by speaking to me in a way that I wouldn't speak to other people.
Yeah,
And I think that there was a common theme through a lot of the management I had in those early years of recruitment where, you just can't treat people a certain way and then expect them to run through a wall for you, or to go to war for you. But yet, at the same time, they could be inspirational. And so for me, I took away from that. I had some, awful experiences of being spoke to in a team, and being put down
Yeah.
while my team is around me. They're the kind of things that when I set up on my own, I was like, that will not happen in my business. I will not have that. People should be treated as adults. We don't come to work because, I guess we do come to work because we have to, but we don't work where we want because we have to, because there's
Sure.
always choice out there. I want people to want to work here because they feel valued and they feel like they're treated as adults.
And it's so important, Ian. I have seen through my career, and I commented actually on some of these posts today, that I've seen good managers and bad managers, good leaders and bad leaders, both experience and attain positive results, whether that's from a P&L, profit, whatever it may be, but they've achieved the goal they set out to. 10 times out of 10, I would always choose to be the empathetic one, the one who uses their intuition, understands, treats people like people. And treating people like people doesn't mean that you
Yeah.
don't make hard decisions. It doesn't mean that you don't dismiss people, but you do it in a way where you're honouring that they're a human being, they're a person,
Yeah.
and they're not beneath you. It's
Yeah.
something that's always riled me and never sat well with me. And I think just listening to you then is a classic example of not all experiences are good experience, but from all experiences you can take something positive from
Yeah.
even those negative experiences.
Absolutely. I mean, one of and I probably will touch a little bit more on this as we go on, but, one of the challenges that I had and that really frustrated me, and I probably was unsure on how to deal with it when we hit our peak, 20 heads across various locations. I had an ever-growing senior management team, and that management team managed the staff and obviously the structure of the business. And I lost good people that came to me over the years and said, loved working for you, but, this is why I'm leaving, or this is why I'm leaving. And I think, for me, when you hand over that responsibility of your people to other management, it's a real difficult, you've really got to know you've got the right people in situ, because, you will lose great people from poor management, or it might not even be poor management, it could be just a different management style that's not adapting to any given individual and drives that individual to go to your competitor down the road.
And I guess that's why it's so important to ensure certainly your direct line of reports, and it filters down throughout the company, that people are bought into the vision and the mission and who you are as a business, as opposed to this is just I'm a bum on a seat.
Yeah.
And people just trying to make as much money as they can in a short period of time.
Very true.
Ian, so okay, that's your early career. At some point, you make a decision to leave prime time, and to then do what?
So that was going out to the big wide world on my own, and that really only came about by default. We had the 2008 2009 crash where the world went crazy. I'd spent 8 years or so working my way up into kind of area regional role, and literally overnight, the company, quite rightly, but for me, it was like they got rid of that middle tier management, and I found myself. Luckily, I still had a job. That was the main thing. But I found myself back in Sheffield, where it all started 8 years ago, doing the job that I came in to do 8 years ago, which was obviously a really, really difficult, pill to swallow. And so that's what really kind of gave me a little bit of motivation to think, well, what shall I do now? There wasn't jobs out there because the world really had gone crazy for those that hadn't experienced working in that period. And that's where I had a cousin who had done a similar situation in the US. He'd worked his way up more in finance, working for big blue chip companies. He'd worked his way into a senior role. He was made redundant, so they decided to bring the family back to the UK because his wife was a pharmacist that couldn't work over in the US because of different education, etc. But obviously, so they took the decision to come back to the UK, and it was him really that said, why don't we start a recruitment business? I've spoke to a load of these recruitment agents who want to try and get me jobs, and I don't think any of them are any good. So why don't we do it together? And that's what we did. So
It's still a bold move, though, right? You're in employment during the financial crash, and you're about to jack that all in to go and start this new thing.
yeah, I mean, I look back now, I'd even question if I'd do it now to my old
It's
self. But
ballsy. It's ballsy.
yeah,
I like it, but you've got to
I
take it.
mean, the you know what, the one biggest thing that was the hardest thing to take in all that was I had a lovely Audi A4 as a company car,
Yeah, yeah, I remember them.
and I had to drive. My father-in-law at the time had a V-Reg Ford Mondeo that it was ready for the scrap, and
Uh,
said, "Well, you can drive that until you get yourself sorted." And so, going from that to a very old Ford Mondeo was really difficult.
yeah,
Didn't do the street cred any good.
yeah, I'm sure he didn't. But again, I think that's just part of who you are. You're prepared to eat that
Yeah,
humble pie, and your goal that you were trying to attain was much bigger than the
absolutely.
vanity that
Yeah,
of
and it really was that that cliche of back bedroom with a telephone. That literally is where it started, and then we made this really bold move to take on a two-man office that would cost us about 200 quid a month, but it was massive at the time.
yeah, yeah.
And it was, they really, I suppose they're the years that really shaped me, because I went back from managing people back to being completely on the front line,
On the phones.
doing all the 360 recruitment, selling, filling,
Yeah.
the long hours just to get money in the bank to give us some stability. And I didn't go with a lump of cash. I didn't go with anything. There was no lump of cash. There was no nothing.
Yeah, it wasn't redundancy or anything. You handed your notice in, you went.
Literally, I had a not even a few quid in the bank. you know,
Yeah.
it was just sink or swim. The two of us got on, and we did well. We dropped on with a few clients. The office where we got our first office was in a business centre that was owned by quite a large manufacturing business, that we ended up knocking on their door saying, "We're renting an office off you. Do you need any recruitment?" Which ended up being one of our biggest accounts for 5 years,
Oh,
running. So it was
yeah,
a
yeah.
lot of it. You could look back and say you got a bit lucky here and there, and obviously you make your own luck. But
Absolutely.
yeah, it
So,
was.
Ian, in those early years, what was the plan? What was the goal? What were you trying to achieve?
Do you know
Did
what?
you envisage today, or actually were your goals completely different?
No, I don't think I ever set out to build a business that turns over 25, 30 million. There's never anything like that in my mind. I would say the first 12 months was literally, the focus was month by month, can I pay myself? That literally was it. And then beyond that, when that started to become a reality, and a bit of surplus cash in there, and you're thinking about that first recruit, I guess that's where that growth journey first started, after probably the first full year of trading, just me and my business partner at the time. And ultimately that was my then ambition, my growing ambition, my growing confidence of this can go somewhere. This can really change my life and my family's life. That's where the cracks then actually started in the relationship within my business partner. He was, there was 14 years difference between me and him from an age perspective. I had the world to take over in his career a lot more. He didn't have a mortgage. This was all most just to see him out till he retires kind of thing,
Sure.
a bit of work-life balance. And I wanted completely opposite. And, he was very risk averse, so I wanted banks to loan us money, and I wanted to take the temp world by storm. But with that comes a lot of risk on, if people don't pay you, bad debts and cash flow, etc. And so that's really where the cracks started, was my ambition and my growing confidence, and his probably, I guess, fading into the background and enjoying what we had, but was happy with what we had. And that's where we came to an agreement one day that you need to go that direction and I need to go in that direction. And it literally was like that overnight. He ended up going to an office upstairs. I stayed in the office
Wow.
downstairs.
Right.
He took one half of the staff. I took the other half of the
Yeah, yeah,
staff.
yeah.
And Venato was born.
So, how many years were you both working together before you split?
So 2010, the Christmas of 2009, I left prime time,
Yeah.
and I launched Venatu independently. Well, with another business partner, but a much smaller stake, in 2016.
Okay, so approximately
2016 or
5, 6 years you
2015,
guys
I
were
should
together.
probably know that.
Yeah, yeah,
So we had, we had five, well, we had 4 solid years as a
yeah,
small, well, like I say, I think the first business we had maybe 18 staff at the time, but I just wanted, I did want to roll the dice, I did want the banks to back us, and I did want, and I understand, I look back now and I totally understand, maybe didn't understand at the time, but understand why he wouldn't have wanted to do that, why he didn't want to put his house on the line, why,
yeah,
all those things that you have to do if you're wanting to, a bank to loan you a lot of
sure,
money to pay temps.
yeah.
So, and that's really where the temp journey really kicked off.
Right. Oh, no, it's interesting because there are periods in your career where it seems like a lot of learning had to happen very quickly.
Yeah,
In forming a new business, running
yeah,
a business. I'm sure you weren't trained in how to run a business. You've worked for
yeah,
businesses before, but then you're having to run one, and then now you're having to learn how to split a business and
absolutely.
independently run a business by yourself. What was
Yeah,
that
I
like?
mean, well, do you know what? And this is probably a scary admittance. I probably still don't really know how to run a business. What I know how to do is run a recruitment team.
Yeah,
And, Gary was the finance arm in my first business. That's all he did. He did a bit of recruitment in the early days, but then stepped back and did all the invoicing and the payroll and all that kind of thing. And so I never had to worry about that. Then when we split, the first thing that I did, one of my uh, biggest clients at the time, I used to deal with him. He was an FD who'd just gone into the world of consulting. So I knocked on his door and said, I don't know how to do finance, and you're a chartered accountant. If I give you, a small percentage of my business, would you help me out in the early days and get me up and running? And we had a good relationship. We both had a beer, and that's where the name came from. That as quickly as that night, let's have a beer. He got
oh,
a little
okay.
bit
So you didn't
excited
get a
about it.
marketing agency to come up with that and sit down and
No,
ponder
no,
for weeks on end
yeah.
and pay them 100 grand.
Absolutely not. Yeah,
Really?
over. Yeah, it was done in an evening over a beer, and I think I don't think Michael would have ever thought that he would have then had to put the time into this business that he did
Mm,
or that he has done because of the sheer growth that we went on. But Michael was a lot more experienced at dealing with banks. He'd worked, for big, plus million turnover businesses, being the FD, and so dealing with a bank to lenders, £500,000 or what they'd turn into a bit, it was that's what Michael did. And so he really helped facilitate the things that I couldn't get access to in my first business because that's not what my business partner wanted.
yeah. It sounds like you have an acute awareness of your strengths and your weaknesses, and
Yeah,
you're open with it. I'm good at this. I'm not good at that. So I get other people
absolutely.
who are much better than me at that to do that, and I stick to the stuff that I know how to do.
I think that's one of my biggest strengths, to be honest. I think I've gone through my career putting people in positions that can do it better than what I can.
Yeah,
And I think that's been my whole ethos throughout my career is, if I'm going to employ someone to do something that I either aren't very good at or I'm now becoming too busy to,
mm.
to, to do that, I want them to be able to do it better than me.
But you don't sound
Uh,
like a micromanager then.
you what? Sorry, I couldn't hear you
You
there.
don't sound like a micromanager.
No,
Yeah, one of your strengths and what's allowed you to, or you feel what's allowed you to grow, is by bringing in experts and giving them the room and the space to do what they do.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think, I've also learned the hard way, which is, when we really were on that growth and everything we touched turned to gold, and that management team grew, and maybe I put a little bit too much responsibility into certain people's hands, and
Yeah,
then where then things start to turn in the economy. That's when I was like, I've got to deep dive back into this business now because I've probably stepped away a little bit too far from
yeah,
what's going on underneath this layer of management that I talk to on a regular basis. And then that's been probably, that's been me up until now.
yeah. And so the Venato experience, how has that been? You say you rocketed things grew
So,
very quickly. Just
yeah,
talk me through that
I
experience.
mean, just to give you an idea, we started with 8 staff in the summer of 2000, and I think it's 16. It could be 15, but I'm sure it's 16.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm sure it's 16. The summer of 2016, um, I had a team of 8. Coming out of 2021 into 2022, we had somewhere in the region of 110 heads
Wow.
in the business. It was, I mean, we went through a period where, there was every 2 weeks we had a number of people starting in the business,
Yeah.
and through all that time, like this industry does, you do turn over a lot of staff, so that 110 heads
Yeah.
does a lot of turnover. We had a peak, we had 3 people in our training department. And I think, the plan at that time was to just keep growing, keep opening offices, and everything went well. As we increase heads, we increase profit. And, whilst you're doing that, fantastic. And then I probably could have recognised sooner that we were increasing heads, which is, let's be honest, it's increasing costs, but our profit wasn't increasing. So we were increasing all this risk for no more profit. And really, when I look back now, that's something I wish I'd have recognised a lot sooner, because I'd probably have actioned it sooner. And then it wasn't until then the economy forced me to action things, which, the energy crisis in 2022 was really the wake-up call. And as we led into that Christmas, there was just no Christmas peak, and a big part of our business was industrial, where you accept that your profit's going to come in that last quarter of the year, or a lot of your profit, and it just didn't come. So as we went into that Christmas, that's probably the most stressed I've been as a business owner going into 2023. Huge costs, business just not where it needs to be, no industrial peak to kind of fill your bank account towards the back end of the year, going into that slow period in January and February. So things became really tight, and that's where I got my management team in, and I sat down and I'd taken a long, hard look at what I wanted and where this business was. And that's where I was like, I don't want the heads, I don't want the costs. Let's look, what are we good at? We had a hyper focus of what we're good at. And what was glaringly obvious, we had this fantastic business in automotive. Because that team was stable, instead of growing that team, we just left it, and we put all these other costs in other areas that weren't making money.
Yeah.
Because we were trying to make money in that area. And so we just stopped, and and I went, right, this is where we need to invest, but we don't need to invest that much. What we need to do is to start to, strategically walk away from a big part of our business, which is industrial. But it's not that we've walked away from it fully, but we didn't, I didn't want the branch network. I didn't want 3 people out in a given location, because with that 3 people, in a really tough industrial market, it's easy for that people. You need a hefty management team to then make them feel loved and
They can quickly
supported.
become isolated, can't they? They can quickly
Yeah,
become isolated, which, and I think when a department or a group of people become isolated, it becomes difficult and challenging for them too, because they're not really getting the company ethos. And
yeah,
they're not quite sure what's going on day to day. And I know in today's world, where we've got Teams and Zoom, and we do all these town halls and everything, that helps, but it's not the same. So,
it's not.
yeah, and it sounds
And
like you were diversifying, and
yeah,
diversification is good, but you've always got to keep it in layman's terms. You've got to look after your bread and butter.
well, and I just, with 120 heads, there was 120 problems, and
Yeah,
and it was just the business wasn't sustainable long term. And so, we know we had pockets of really, really strong business, but we weren't giving it at all. I wasn't giving, just because they were doing well, I neglected it instead of put more effort into it. So it was just that wake up call of, let's focus on where we're good. And so we spent 18 months really up until probably the middle of 2024, strategically merging offices,
mm,
downsizing, reducing head cost. And I think finally we got to where I felt really comfortable, probably summer of 2024. And it almost felt like we'd press the reset button and we could go again. And we could go again in a way where we could be better than what we were before. We've learned a lot of mistakes, focusing more on revenue per head as opposed to how big's that team? Can we get more revenue out of that team, out of that individual? And that, I would say, over the last 12 months has just transformed our business again. And touch wood, I think we're as strong as we've ever been. It's manageable. The business is manageable. I'm still able to get round and see everyone most weeks. We haven't got offices all over the place that get neglected and don't see anyone for weeks or months at a time.
Yeah, and I know you're a people's person, and I know when you grow at that rate, at that speed, you're no longer having the opportunity to meet your new starters. You're no longer having the opportunity to know everybody that's in the business, where I'm guessing at the moment, you know everybody who's in your business.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I'm back to meeting everybody
yeah,
before they join. So the recruitment that we are doing, and we have done for the last 12 months, I've met 95% of those people before saying, yes, let's bring them into the business. Whereas before, unless it was a management role, I wouldn't, I'd see people walk in and I'd like, do these work for us?
yeah. No,
Um,
I get it. In my last role, where I was an MD for a recruitment firm, I wanted to see everybody that came in the door, not necessarily to vet them, but I want them to hear from me on what's important with regards to the vision that what we're trying to achieve here and what we're trying to
yeah,
build. And not to sugarcoat it. And you'll always have people out there who will be doing the recruitment for you, who will sell the worst story in the world, or the worst
yeah,
job in the world, and trying to put the frighten the living daylight out of people. But you want to make sure they know what they're walking into, and the culture that
yeah.
you've tried to create, and making sure that it's a good fit, because that's how you'll create success. That's how they'll create success for themselves, but also for the business.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest challenges, you talk about culture, and that's really, it was really apparent we'd lost our culture, we'd lost our
Mm.
direction. But then trying to create a culture when you are spending probably 12 months downsizing your team and people are seeing their mates being let go, or teams, offices being merged, which unfortunately would result in redundancies of people that had worked together and what have you. That was such a tough time to try
Mm.
and maintain a level of positivity across the business when every week people were almost seeing, they've gone now, they've gone,
Yeah.
they've gone. We did it strategically. It was what we wanted to do. It was to get us to where we wanted to be today. But
And
that
when,
culture took an absolute battering.
yeah.
But I think again, I think testament to us and the management team that have been a part of that, because I'd probably say today it feels our business now feels like it did in those early days where we're all in it together. Everybody's on the same page. Everybody understands the direction that they're going in and that their teams are going in, and it's a nice place to be again. But it's sad to say for a period it wasn't. And as the owner of that lays heavy, sleepless nights and constantly thinking about what's the next decision, where do we merge, or what redundancies do we have to make now. Yeah, that they were tough times.
Well, yeah, the decision's not made lightly. Let's not forget, though, what you've created is a multi-million pound business
Yeah,
that employs and has employed hundreds of people over the
yeah,
years.
yeah,
You've helped to put food in people's mouths, roofs over people's heads. And whilst I know, as the owner and as the leader of that organization, there are times where it feels very doom and gloom for you,
yeah,
you've been extremely successful. And not again, not that's not even to talk about all the temps and the perm staff you've placed into businesses too. I googled earlier, what is a CEO?
yeah,
And Google tells me a chief executive officer is the highest ranking executive in a company, with responsibility for overall direction and performance of the organization. My question to you, Ian, as a CEO and an owner, is what is your daily routine now? What does that look like?
yeah. I don't look at myself I look at myself as the owner, right? So going back to what I said before, I'm also very aware of, I like to give the senior guys. I mean, my senior team now is only kind of today three heads. Um, and my routine now is to make sure every day I speak to those guys. We set out, like we've spent the last 6 weeks or so doing all the budgets for this coming year, and really we've created a direction together. And what I'm very conscious of now is, this is mainly because these are guys that I trust and that have been with me for some time and that are successful, is not to step on their toes. It's just to touch base. But I think a lot of my time is spent touching base then with the rest of the people and showing them that I'm still very heavily involved. I'll go on visits most weeks with some of the guys. I'm at an exhibition next week with with the construction team
Yeah.
down in London. So making sure that I'm involved in what they're doing and showing interest in what they're doing. The direction we talk about that, we'll then talk about it at the end of the quarter. Where are we? What did we achieve? What went wrong? Let's relook at that. And I've also, I would say, this last probably 12 or so months, I've also got back into being very heavily involved in bringing the right people into the business, because I did lose total control of that. Bringing the right people into your business, can be quite timely. Meeting people, going out and having coffees, making sure that they know that we're interested in the right people. There's people that in some of our divisions that we know that would like to bring in because I've highlighted them. I know they are, and I know why I want to bring them in, and I know, I know by being consistent and by keeping in touch with these people, I know I'll eventually get them. And these people make big impacts. It's all about the people. If you bring the right people into your business, you just sit back and watch them make money.
Yeah.
That's bring the wrong people in. Well, that then stops the right people bringing money in as
Well,
well.
it can
And
spread like a cancer, isn't it? And it can
yeah,
destroy your company culture.
yeah. We set up a slight offshoot business about 12 months ago. That complements our automotive business, that's really started to take off, and I've found some of my time being really excited and getting involved in some at the moment it's only 4 or 5 people strong.
Yeah.
But that business has the ability to potentially make as much as this business, because we're doing it a very different way. It's a very lean model. It's a very exciting project for me to get involved in something that's at the very start again. And that's kind of got my taste buds, and it's slightly different to recruitment. It's more of an engineering support. It's all labor driven, but I think me getting involved in other revenue streams is something that I'm also very keen on for me personally. We've got a couple of outside of the main core business. There's a small exec business, and there's like I said, now this engineering, which really over the last 6 months has really started to take off. So getting involved in other projects is quite nice because of the team that I've got here.
Well, it's interesting hearing you talk about these other projects, and I can see how upbeat you are when you're talking about them. And it leads me to the question then: what motivates you? You've made millions. You have a multi-million pound business.
Um,
Things are going well at the moment.
I think what motivates me is, do you know what? Honestly, it's the fear of failure. I think that is one of the biggest things. I've got friends that over recent years that have had businesses, very successful businesses. Unfortunately, due to things out of their control, things have not worked out, and businesses have folded. And I think that fear of failure for me has always been the one thing that has kept me driven to make sure that it's this business or anything that I've had a couple of projects that haven't worked out, but I'm in a luxury position where I've got a core business that's very self-sufficient and successful. But, if you don't try,
Yeah,
and the ones that, are working out are doing well. But, for me, overall, it's that fear of failure for the core business. I think what motivates me for the other revenue streams is there's still a level of fear of failure, because if one thing doesn't work out, if I've got 2 or 3 or 4 things that are you're neglecting your risk in the long term. And then I guess it's the old cliches. It's the kids. I'd like this tough world out there. For them to get mortgages and deposits for houses when they're old enough. Just you look at how this country's going.
it's crazy. It's scary. It's
It's
scary.
very scary. So there's a level of motivation there for now. If I can get something that can give them a start in life.
So in 10 years' time, when we meet at Centre Parks again, but we've got our walking sticks and we've got our grandchildren with us, what will you be doing? What Ian will I meet then?
Oof. Do you know what? I would like to think I've kind of completed the journey of being a business owner, and that's successfully exiting with a nice pay off by whoever wants to buy that. So I think certainly within 10 years, I'd like to think that the core business, there's been some kind of exit strategy executed successfully, which then frees me up to maybe pursue things that I enjoy. I'm big into my fitness, doing something along those lines. And recently I've had I was only in a meeting this morning, a new startup company that just reached out asking for some advice. It kind of started a recruitment agency about 9 months ago, and it's probably not going according to plan, and he just wanted my take on things. But just talking through things like that and helping people that you've been there, done it, seen it, and got the T-shirt. Maybe something along those lines. But, I'd certainly say the headline would be, as I say, completed the game successfully,
Yeah.
which is get out at the right time and then have security.
So flipping that question on its head, because we will have a lot of young listeners.
Yeah.
I say young listeners, people who are starting out in their career, or
Yeah.
maybe at that point in their career that you were at whilst you were at prime time. If I were to put you in a room with 20-year-old Ian and you've got 15 minutes to speak to him, what would you say to him? What would you advise him that would better prepare him for the journey he's going to go on over the next 15, 20 years?
I think for one, it'd be you can't be scared. I mean, I guess in the end I wasn't, but in the early days I was scared of risk because I was told to be scared of risk. And so I would tell myself, don't be scared of risk because risk and reward. You have to take risks along the line to be. So you have to put everything on the line at times to get to where you want to be. And if that doesn't go in your favour, you go again. But I think it'd be preparing for how lonely it is. As an owner of a business, from the outside, it never seems lonely because you've always got people around you. You've always got people, when we have company events, you've always got people wanting to talk to you and etc. But the reality is, it is a very lonely place. And when things don't go particularly very well, it's all on you. And you've got to prepare yourself for that. And I think that's what I wasn't prepared for because I was lucky enough for things to go quite well, quite early on and kept going well. But I think as things changed in this business, 2022, you realise no one cares. No one cares because the sun's there. The sun's there, okay. That's fine. And you have to deal with that on your own. And you have to be strong enough to make those decisions. And there's only you who's going to make those decisions. And if people tell you it's wrong, but you believe it's right, you've got to do it.
Fantastic advice, Ian. Which leads to my final question, which is because I think people are going to listen to this and they're going to say, you know what, he seems all right. I wouldn't mind working for that company. How do people get in contact with your company if they're interested in reaching out to say, are there any vacancies? That's question one. And the second part of that question is, and if there are companies out there who have a requirement for a labour force for an industry that you're in, how do they get in contact with you too?
Anybody who's wanting to come and work for this business, drop me a message on LinkedIn, send me an email. My phone number's on my LinkedIn profile. Text me. Anybody who's interested, no matter what experience, no matter how much experience, no matter what they want to do, if they are keen to talk about working with me, come direct to me, and we'll have a conversation. We'll have a coffee, and we'll work it out and see if there's any mileage. And I think from a client perspective, getting in touch with either myself, because obviously I'm still very much involved day to day, but otherwise we've got our website where it's got all our key personnel on there. Meet the team page. If you're working in automotive or engineering sector or construction, then all our contact details are on our website, and it's very self-explanatory which guys you need to be speaking to. It's all divisionalised.
Brilliant. And I would like to say, just before we close here, Ian is the #1 CEO in Doncaster. I have just given him that title, and therefore I can say it from a marketing perspective. Actually, as soon as we go off air, I'm going to be asking him for a job because I'm so inspired by this man that I'm moving.
It's not hard in Doncaster, though. I'll say that's the only downside.
Yeah, I'm moving the family up. As soon as my missus comes in from work, I'm saying we're moving to Doncaster. I've got a new job. Ian, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you for being so authentic and so open with your story. I think it's going to touch a lot of people, and a lot of people will learn from this conversation that we've had here. And I wish Benatu all of the best in the future.
Superb. It's been great speaking to you again, Obi.
No worries.
Like I say, we'll see you in Centre Parks or some random golf course somewhere across the country soon, no doubt.
Thanks.
All right. Take care.